Hey Optimancers, Chris here. I've been doing an in-depth analysis of playtest packet 5, and in today's video I'm analyzing the playtest Sorcerer and Draconic Sorcerer. How's that for an introduction? Let's get started. The design notes are: Innate Sorcery is a new first level feature, giving 2 sorcerer spells that represent the roiling magic within. So this would suggest what they're going for with this is a sorcerer that has like turbulent magic. Spellcasting gives more spells to the sorcerer, capping at 22 rather than 15. Font of Magic looks like it plugs a hole by putting a prerequisite sorcerer level for creating each spell slot. Metamagic is gained at 2nd level, and you get an extra selection, and you can switch them out after a long rest. Sorcerer's Vitality is a new feature at 5th level. Arcane Eruption is a new feature at 7th level. Sorcery Incarnate is a new feature at 9th level. And Sorceress Restoration has moved from 20th level to 15th level, and it's been juiced up. Arcane Apotheosis is a new wild feature at 18th level. Lots to talk about there. And Epic Boon is a 20th level feature like all the other classes. So here's the new Sorcerer class chart, and it looks pretty similar to the existing chart. Spell slot progression, cantrips, sorcery points, they're all identical. The notable change here is we have a column that says prepared spells, and this would be compared to the known spells column on the old chart. And what they discussed in the design notes is you will have more spells to choose from to cast. So you're going to cap out here at 22, and the old known spells column capped out at 15, so that is 7 more. Of course, you're not going to have 7 more spells at all levels. So how many more spells will you have access to? Well, the first thing I should mention is there are a number of spells that will be automatically prepared for your sorcerer as you move up in level that aren't indicated on this column. But let's ignore those for now and just look at the differences in the columns themselves. And what we see is at level 1, they are the same. They both start at 2. Then at level 2, we're 1 spell ahead here. Then at level 3, we're 2 spells ahead. At level 5, we're 3 ahead. Level 9, we're 4 ahead. And then we stay at 4 ahead for pretty much the rest of our career, except at 18th, 19th, and 20th level, we go to 5, 6, and 7. So the increases seem to be spread out over the first 9 levels, then there's nothing from 10 through 17, then a bunch crammed into the last 3 levels. What they've done here for the most part is matched up prepared spells to the number of spell slots we have, with the exception of level 2. So that'd be fairly in line with previous playtests, except now we'll have more freedom to prepare spells of different levels. The hit points and proficiencies haven't changed, nor have the multiclassing rules for the sorcerer, so let's get into the class features. So the playtest Sorcerer has access to the Arcane spell list, and unlike the Bard, there's no restriction by spell school, so that's pretty good. Now the Sorcerer has always had a pretty good spell list, but there's even more on this one. And where we would really notice the difference, I think, is when we get into those like 7th and 8th level spells. Around that point, the Sorcerer spell list isn't all that great, and so we get some nice spells here like Force Cage and Maze that really bump it up. Now, although we have a prepared spells column, don't be fooled. These are known spells. You cannot change them after a long rest. You can only change 1 spell when you level up. At first level, we get Innate Sorcery, which isn't so much a feature as you get 2 additional prepared spells, but you don't get to pick them, so let's take a look at them. Sorceress Burst is a new cantrip. This is an attack cantrip with a 120-foot range. So you make a ranged spell attack against the target, and then you do a d6 damage, scaling at the normal levels for these kinds of cantrips. You can choose the type of damage from acid, cold, fire, lightning, poison, psychic, or thunder. And then the main thing, you get exploding dice. So it says if you roll a 6 on your d6 damage die, you can roll another d6 and add it to the damage. Then if you roll another 6, you can add it, and so on. You can never add more dice of damage than your spellcasting ability modifier. Now, you're not just watching any video about the Sorcerer, you're watching a Treant Monk video, so you know that I'm going to talk about math now. Exploding dice may be fun, but they're not as effective as a lot of people think they are. The math on this is actually pretty easy. So we have a d6, and the average result of a d6 is 3.5. Now we're going to turn it into an exploding die. So here's how we can determine the average of that die if it is exploding. So we start with a 3.5, and let's say that we have a limit of exploding 1 time. Well, we have a 1 in 6 chance of that die exploding. So what we do now is we take the average of 3.5, divided by 6, and that's 0.58. So if you had an exploding die that could only explode once, then you take 3.5 plus 0.58, and the new average damage for that d6 would be 4.08. But now let's increase it and say that it could explode up to 2 times. What's the chance of that second explosion happening? Well, it's 1/6 as likely as the first explosion. So we're now dividing 3.5 by the result of 6 times 6, or 36. So now we're adding 0.10, and yes, math nerds, I am rounding to 2 decimal places. So now our average total damage for the exploding d6 is up to 4.18. But let's say the limit for the explosions is 3, so that d6 could explode again. What's the chance of that? Well, it's 1/6 as likely as 1 in 36. So 36 times 6 is 1 chance in 216. So 3.5 divided by 216, and we get 0.02, and now we're up to 4.20 on our exploding die. Now that's probably where we need to stop, because at level 1 we're likely restricted to 3 explosions, but at level 4 we may have a 4th. Exciting times! How much does our damage increase? Well, there's 1/6 the chance of needing that die, so 216 times 6, and now we're going to be getting that sweet 4th die, 1 out of every 1,296 rolls. And how much are we adding to the damage? 3.5 divided by 1,296, and the result is 0. I realize it's not exactly 0, but it is not even close to 0.01. In fact, if we were to place no limit at all on exploding dice, and I wasn't around to do decimal places, you could roll 1,000 6s, and you could get 1,001st die, but it's never going to happen. We will never ever get to 4.21. So the average damage of an exploding d6, even without the unnecessary restriction, caps at 4.20. Now, as you level up, you will have more dice with this cantrip, and that means more potential explosions. But the calculations for each die don't change. It's just more likely your explosion limit will come up. But I don't know why they even bother with the limit. It's really not statistically significant. So technically speaking, as you level up and add more dice, the amount for each die is a little bit less, but it's still right around 4.2. So basically, an exploding d6 has an average damage of 4.2, and that is less than a d8 has. So the damage here is really bad for an attack cantrip. Attack cantrips generally do d8s or d10s, and even the ones that do d8s usually have some secondary effect. Now, I suppose if you get a subclass that has bonus to a particular kind of damage, like the Draconic Sorcerer recovering in the playtest, at least you're guaranteed access to a cantrip that does that damage type. So unless that's the case, I would simply get a different attack cantrip and use that instead. Then we get Chaos Bolt, which is a word-for-word copy of the version in Xanathar's Guide to Everything, and it is just not a good spell. It's a first level spell, it's a ranged spell attack with 120-foot range, and it delivers 2d8 plus 1d6 damage. That's 12.5 on average. I mean, if you hit. You don't know what damage type you're going to do. You can pick either of your d8s, and then you got to look at this chart, and depending what you get, you could even be stuck with something like poison damage against undead or something like that. Now, you have a little bit of control as long as you don't roll doubles. Of course, you kind of want to roll doubles. It's just a big mess. However, here's the part people like. If you roll doubles on the d8, then the bolt leaps to another target within 30 feet, and you make a new attack roll, a new damage roll, and potentially the bolt can leap again if you roll doubles again. The only limit is the number of creatures that are potential targets, because they can only be hit once per casting. If we upcast this spell with a higher level slot, the damage increases by a d6 per level. So this is just a terrible spell, and I will show you why. And it's not just about the damage type. The amount of damage is awful. So let's assume favorable conditions. So we have enemies and they're just lined up for us. So there's no limit to the number of enemies we could potentially hit. And we'll assume whatever damage type we get, they will have no resistance and no immunity. So if we cast this at first level, that's 12.5 times our chance to hit, and I generally assume 60%, so that's 7.5. Then there's a chance to crit, so 5% times 12.5 is 0.6. Add it together, and that's 8.1. As far as single target damage, that's what you get, 8.1. Now let's say you're a first level rogue stabbing with a rapier, or maybe you're shooting a longbow. Well, that's 4.5 damage plus 3 dexterity plus 3.5 sneak attack, and that's 11. 60% chance to hit, that's 6.6, plus criticals for 0.4, and that's 7 average damage. So we're doing 1 more point of single target damage, except with an unreliable damage type, and it's using 1/2 of our spell slots. But what about the leaping to the second target? Well, it's exploding dice all over again, so our chance of rolling doubles on a d8 is 1 in 8. So each additional potential target will average 1/8 the damage of the one previously. So potential target number 2, it's 8.1 divided by 8, so they will take an average of 1.01 damage. Potential target number 3 is 1.01 divided by 8, or average 0.13 damage. Potential target number 4 is 0.13 divided by 8, or 0.02 damage. Potential target number 5 is 0.02 divided by 8. It's now statistically insignificant damage, and you can add an infinite number of targets after that and do the math, and it's not going to increase the number significantly. Add it all together, and the leaping will average 1.16 additional secondary damage. Once again, that's a point of damage to a second target. Now, previously I did videos covering barbarians and fighters who can really dish out some damage. At least at level 13 where I did the calculations, but I suspect across the levels. The fighter did 50 damage every round, the barbarian even more. So how about our sorcerer? Well, at 13th level they could use a 7th level slot, so let's do that. Let's show these warriors the damage a mighty sorcerer can deliver, at least once per day, because that's the thing. Sure, warriors can do that 50 points plus damage per round all day long, but when we use these big spell slots, then we get these big results. Doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's dramatic. Well, 7th level slot, so we add 66 to our damage. That's 21 on average, added to the 12.5, and that's 33.5. And we have a 60% chance to hit, and that's 20.1, plus crits, and that's 1.68, so we're up to 21.78. 21.78. The fighter, 50 plus damage, all day long. However, we haven't started yet. Secondary damage, baby. 21.78 divided by 8, that's 2.72. 2.72 divided by 8, that's 0.34. 0.34 divided by 8, that's 0.04. 0.04 divided by 8, that's 0.1, rounded up of course. 0.01 divided by 8 is not statistically significant. So we're talking an additional 3.11 damage, so our total is 24.89. That is using the sorcerer's highest level spell slot at level 13. Less than half the damage warriors do all day long. And that's ignoring the unreliable damage type. So when I say Chaos Bolt is bad, I mean it's bad. Now, exploding dice can be fun. Arcing spells can be fun. But just be aware, they're really weak. At 2nd level, we get Font of Magic, and we get 2 sorcery points. And we can create a 1st level spell slot with them, or use them for Metamagic. And of course, the number of sorcery points go up with your levels, and the level of spell slots you're able to create go up with your levels as well. And at 2nd level, we get Metamagic. We now choose 3 Metamagic options, and we can switch them out on a long rest. So it is time for us to take a good look at Metamagic. And we have some design notes. Careful Spell now prevents an affected creature from taking half damage on a save. Distance Spell increases the spell's range by number of feet based on your sorcerer level, rather than doubling the range. This results in a greater increase to range for most spells. Extend Spell now makes it easier to maintain concentration on the affected spell. Heighten Spell now costs 2 sorcery points instead of 3, and it imposes disadvantage on all the target saves against the spell, rather than just the first save. Quicken Spell now assumes players don't know the rules on casting a bonus action spell. Unfortunately, that is probably a good assumption most of the time. I mean, I play with players who I know watch my videos, but still think that after they cast a cantrip as a bonus action, they can cast a leveled spell with their action because the bonus action spell was a cantrip. So yeah, good idea to clarify anything involving bonus action spell casting. Seeking Spell has been added. It's the same as it was in Tasha's. Ooh boy, I should recalculate Chaos Bolt damage with Seeking Spell added. I'm sure that'll fix the problem. Subtle Spell now removes all the components of a spell unless the material component is consumed. Transmuted Spell has been ported over from Tasha's. And the big one, Twin Spell, which was pretty much recognized as a must-have for any sorcerer and the most powerful metamagic in 5e, has this long design note. Twin Spell has been redesigned. The 2014 version was too powerful. That's accurate, since it basically allowed you to cast 2 spells on the same turn, as in Quicken Spell. No, much, much better than Quicken Spell. And to cast the extra spell with a sorcery point discount. For example, a 3rd level spell slot normally costs 5 sorcery points, but in Twin Spell it only costs 3. The target limitation of Twin Spell failed to contain how overpowered the option was. For sure. And caused confusion. The new version of Twin Spell keeps the sorcery point discount, with Quicken Spell carrying the extra spell on a turn weight. This redesign has allowed us to remove the targeting limitation that Twin Spell had before. Okay, so let's go through them. Careful Spell now allows you to actually protect your allies when they're inside the fireball radius. Great. This metamagic used to only really be used for spells like Hypnotic Pattern or Fear, so spells where if you make the save nothing happens, and this opens up damage spells. I should note that the wording here, a chosen creature automatically succeeds on its saving throw, is worded as a single saving throw. So spells like Sickening Radiance, which potentially involve multiple saves, I don't think would all be protected. Otherwise, the wording would be, a chosen creature automatically succeeds on its saving throws. Still, it is a nice boost here, and I think it's much better. Distance Spell now has a range increase of 30 times your sorcerer level. So that's 60 feet right at level 2, and I guess eventually 300 feet. And like before, a spell with the range of touch gets a 30-foot range. Good. Distance Spell was way too weak before. This is a nice boost. Empowered Spell looks absolutely identical to the 5th edition version. It's not a powerful metamagic, but it can be combined with other metamagics. So once you get to higher levels where you have lots of sorcery points to spend, I could see it. Extend Spell now provides advantage on concentration saving throws for a spell that you extended. And that is technically a boost, though I would imagine most sorcerers are going to want to pick up the Warcaster feat, which will make this largely redundant for most concentration saves. Still, not every concentration saving throw is caused by damage, so there is still a buff here, even if it's a minor one. Heightened Spell is probably the biggest metamagic buff. It has a reduced cost to 2 sorcery points and affects all saving throws of one target. That is pretty nice for something like, say, a Hold Monster spell. Quicken Spell is mechanically the same except for the aforementioned clarified mechanics. And Seeking Spell is bad. I'm surprised they didn't reduce the cost to 1 sorcery point, where it would still be bad, but half as bad. Subtle Spell now removes the material component, which I think it always should have. If you have to toss around spell components, it's not really a subtle spell, is it? Transmuted Spell is the same, and it can be a handy metamagic. It's okay. And Twin Spell has been completely redesigned. The old Twin Spell, which was the premier metamagic, is just gone. This is an entirely new metamagic, and it just happens to have the same name as the removed one. When you cast a spell of 1st through 5th level that you also cast on your previous turn by expending a spell slot, you can fuel this turn's casting of the spell by expending sorcery points equal to the spell's level, rather than expending a spell slot. So how good is this? Well, it's probably one of the weaker metamagics. The thing is, you can already cast additional spells of 1st through 5th level with sorcery points. Creating a spell slot is a bonus action, and here's the table. So we can see that Twin Spell would save you 1 sorcery point for a 1st or 2nd level spell, or 2 sorcery points for 3rd, 4th, or 5th level slots. Now you have to cast the same spell twice in a row. And that's of course the restriction, and it makes this not so hot, because your most powerful spells are concentration spells, and you don't want to cast them twice in a row unless you lost concentration right after casting, which hopefully isn't the case. So this is for like spamming Fireball. Now if you're a 5th level sorcerer and you want to use your 2 3rd level spell slots on Fireball, and you don't have Twin Spell, well, you could still get a 3rd Fireball by expending all your sorcery points. But with Twin Spell, you could cast that 3rd Fireball, and although you wouldn't have enough sorcery points to get any extra Fireballs, you would have 2 sorcery points left over, so those could fuel, say, different metamagics. But if you like spamming Fireball, this is probably a decent pick. You actually would get 1 more Fireball at level 6. Though personally, I would recommend Careful Spell for your Fireballs most of the time. And you can't combine metamagic, so you can't have a Twin Spell Fireball that is also Careful. So what we see here with metamagic is balancing. The floor has been raised, and the ceiling has been lowered. And I am all for that. It means I'm not always pressured to pick the same Metamagic every time. And I have to say, I like the new Metamagic design overall. At 3rd level, we're going to pick our Sorcerer subclass. And I'll be covering the included playtest subclass, the Draconic Sorcerer, so let's look at their 3rd level feature. So I guess first I should cover the name change. It used to be Draconic Bloodline, implying that you have some kind of dragon ancestor. Now that's up in the air. Maybe you have a dragon ancestor, or maybe you access the power of dragons through some other means. So at 3rd level, we're going to get Draconic Resilience and Dragon Speech. So the old Draconic Sorcerer got the Draconic language and doubled their proficiency bonus for Charisma skill checks while interacting with dragons. They also got 1 additional hit point per level, and they had a natural armor of 13 plus dexterity, so kind of like a permanent mage armor. The hit point bonus has been carried over, but there are a couple changes to the rest of it. The armor class is now 10 plus dexterity plus charisma. So that will likely be the same at level 1, but it's going to improve as you increase your charisma. Then Dragon Speech allows you to communicate with all creatures of the dragon type. So the ability to communicate with dragons has been expanded to all within the dragon type. The natural armor now scales with charisma, but the double proficiency bonus thing has been removed. I like all these changes. At 5th level, sorcerers get another spell, so this is like innate sorcery where there's no free casting or anything, you just have the spell prepared. This one is called Sorcerer's Vitality, so let's take a look. It's a self-only spell that uses an action, and it heals 2d6 plus your charisma modifier, and ends the blinded, deafened, and poisoned conditions. It upcasts healing an additional d6 per spell slot level. So the good thing here is that sorcerers normally can't get Cure Wounds or Lesser Restoration, and this kind of provides a bit of a patch for that. The bad thing here is this isn't as good as Cure Wounds or Lesser Restoration. I guess it does kind of combine them, but it's weaker on both the hit point restoration and the condition removal front. And the big thing, it's self-only, and the other big thing, it's a 3rd level spell. So it is another pretty crappy spell, I'm afraid. However, unlike the other 2 free spells we received, I could see casting this in some situations, but I wouldn't be casting it much. So this really isn't much of a feature, but you know what? At 5th level, we got 3rd level spells. So that's the feature. This is a ribbon, and the old sorcerer didn't get anything beyond spells at 5th level, and that was plenty. So this is fine. Then at 6th level, we're back to new subclass features. Elemental Affinity used to provide Draconic Sorcerers a charisma bonus to damage on spells that dealt the damage type associated with their dragon type, and they could spend a sorcery point when they cast that spell to get resistance to the damage type for 1 hour. Now you just have resistance to that damage type all the time. This was a necessary buff, good to see it. Then at 7th level, another prepared spell, Arcane Eruption. So let's take a look. So Arcane Eruption is a 4th level spell, 120 foot range, and an instantaneous effect. It creates a 20-foot radius sphere, same as a fireball, and you choose the damage type from acid, cold, fire, lightning, poison, psychic, or thunder. So you should be able to avoid resistances and immunities as long as, it's not a surprise. Each creature in the sphere makes a Constitution saving throw, taking 66 damage on a failed saving throw, or half if they succeed. Then you choose one of the d6s you roll for damage, and the creatures that fail their saving throw get the corresponding condition until the end of your next turn. You can upcast a spell, and it does an additional d6 extra damage for every additional spell slot level. So as far as damage dealing goes, this isn't good. It's 21 average damage, with a Constitution saving throw, the worst to target, for half damage, and the spell slot scaling is awful. This comes nowhere close to fireball damage, despite being a higher spell level. The key here is the additional effect. Some of this stuff isn't good, like, ooh, I've deafened a couple enemies for a round. But you're rolling 6d6s, so you should have at least 1 or 2, and incapacitated and blinded are both good. In fact, it's kind of cool that the better you roll for damage, the worse the secondary effect is, and vice versa. Though obviously the ultimate damage roll would be 1 and then 5 6s. And technically, upcasting does increase your chance of incapacitate because you have more chances to roll the 1. That said, upcasting this spell is awful, don't do it. However, casting with a 4th level spell, I could see. Now this spell is not overpowered by any means. It's a 4th level spell, and what I see here is fairly appropriate for 4th level. But I do like it. I like combining minor damage with riders, always have, and if you can get enough creatures with this, even though you're targeting Constitution, it becomes a numbers game. You hit enough creatures, better chance somebody's going to roll poorly. So overall, I think this is a pretty good spell. I like it. It won't be your most powerful 4th level spell, but it will be worth casting, especially if you're concentrating on a different spell. Then at 9th level, same thing. We're going to get another new spell. So this time it's Sorcery Incarnate. So let's take a look. So this is a 5th level spell you can cast as a bonus action and maintain with concentration for up to 1 minute. While under the effects of this spell, your sorcerer can use up to 2 Metamagic options for each spell you cast, but not for free. You still have to expend the sorcery points as normal, and you have advantage on attack rolls for spells you cast. Finally, you regain 1d4 sorcery points. The way this is worded suggests that it's a one-time benefit. I've read and heard some opinions that this means you get a d4 sorcery points on your turn every turn, but that's not what it says here. It says you get 1d4 sorcery points. Nothing about getting it more than once. Though maybe it should give that, because this is a cool spell, and I hate to say this, but it sucks. Sorry, but this is a 5th level spell, and uses concentration. You cast this as a bonus action on round 1, and what can you do? You can cast a cantrip. So, a firebolt, I guess. And ooh, you got advantage on the roll. Then on round 2, you can apply 2 Metamagics to your spells, except only non-concentration spells. So, all the best spells, sorry, can't cast them. Then you have advantage on attack rolls for spells. This would be good if there were good spells to do attack rolls with. You know what spells you have that require attack rolls? Cantrips and Chaos Bolt. I mean, maybe you've selected Chromatic Orb and Scorching Ray. You shouldn't have, because they're not good either. And you are going to be out-damaged by a mile by the warriors every single round. It feels like they're trying to turn the sorcerer into a spell attacker, but they haven't been given the tools. Archers are going to be out-damaging them, and the only resource they have to expand are arrows. Now, the one use of this spell, I guess, would be for fireball slingers. So again, if you like spamming fireballs, then this could be okay. You could apply both Twin Spell and Careful Spell to the same fireball, or Careful Spell and Transmute Spell. But even for fireball slingers, this isn't great, because assuming you cast this on round 1, then you aren't throwing a fireball on round 1, because you can't cast a leveled spell with your action when you cast this as a bonus action. So unfortunately, this just isn't good. I wouldn't recommend casting it, really, ever. And then at 10th level, we get a subclass feature. So 5th edition Draconic Sorcerers waited until 14th level for the next feature. Instead, they got additional Metamagic at 10th level. So this is brand new. Draconic Exhalation allows you to cast Sorcerous Burst, that awful cantrip we talked about at 1st level, as a 15-foot cone, except you can no longer pick the damage type. It's automatically the type you pick for the subclass. You make a separate attack and damage roll for everyone in the cone. So, if you recall, the average damage per die of Sorcerous Burst was 4.2. So at 10th level, that's 2 dice, so that's 8.4. Take into account chance to hit, and you're looking at about 5.5 damage per target. And 60% actually might be a generous chance to hit in this case, because it's a ranged spell attack, and this is a 15-foot cone, so you have to keep both those enemies at range with this incredibly tight cone. That will increase to a little over 8 damage per target at level 11. If you have Sorcery Incarnate active, well then you're doing about 8 points of damage per target on average, or about 12 at 11th level. And that excitement in my voice is sarcastic. This damage is awful. But there is an upside here. This doesn't eat up resources, so you can do this all day long. But it's just not good damage. Just be aware of that. You're not going to get many targets with a 15-foot cone. I'd expect 2 targets most of the time. In which case, if you have Sorcery Incarnate active, well then you're doing about 23 to 24 points of damage total. Less than half what the warriors are doing, and you're splitting up your damage. Then at 13th level, the sorcerer gets 3 more Metamagic choices. This is a great feature. Not much more to say about that. Then at 14th level, we'll go back to the Draconic Sorcerer for our final subclass feature. And we get Dragon Wings. So I'm going to remind you of the 5th edition Draconic Bloodline, which also gets a feature called Dragon Wings at 14th level. And they gain the ability to sprout a pair of wings as a bonus action, and they got a flying speed equal to their walking speed with no set duration, though you could dismiss them as a bonus action if you wanted to, and it had unlimited use. And because they were physical wings, armor or clothing had to be modified to accommodate them. So really good feature, easily the best feature that the Draconic Sorcerer got, and if you took Draconic Sorcerer, it was always the feature you were looking forward to. Now you sprout Spectral Wings while your Sorcery Incarnate spell is active. Your fly speed now equals your walking speed, and you can hover. In addition, at the end of each of your turns, you inflict the damage type you choose with this subclass to each enemy of your choice within 15 feet of you, equal to your Charisma modifier. Now, the only reason I would ever select Draconic Sorcery was because at least I could look forward to one great subclass feature, Unlimited Concentration Free Flight at 14th level. This feature blows. I could fly with concentration at 5th level, and it was faster, and it had a longer duration, and it could be cast on other creatures. Ugh, this is just no good. Now, if this feature was attached to a good spell, so you cast a good spell and then you sprout the wings, then this would still be a nerf, but it wouldn't be such a hard nerf. The problem here is that the spell this is attached to is god-awful, and adding wings to that spell does not make it a good spell. So this is an awful feature. And I'm just not going to be looking forward to getting these wings. So that's a hard fail for a feature, as far as I'm concerned. So I want to pause right here and take some inventory, okay? Because I've been looking online ever since this playtest came out and hearing that sorcerers got hugely boosted in the playtest. Well, I've gone over everything up to 14th level right now, and would you say that they have been massively boosted? I mean, yes, we have access to some more spells than we did before, and we know more spells than we did before, and those are both nice quality of life things. And the weaker metamagics have been boosted up, and that's also a nice quality of life thing. But when it comes to just power level, the absolute most powerful metamagic is gone, and has been replaced by a metamagic that isn't really powerful. And so the best thing that 5th edition sorcerers can do, they can no longer do. So yes, you have access to more spells, but you won't be twinning them, at least like you were before. And then we have one subclass included, and the one feature that subclass used to get that you looked forward to now doesn't exist, and it's been replaced by a crappy feature. So overall, I'm not sure that sorcerers got boosted at all here. I mean, they got some more unique spells that are just sorcerer spells, and most of them are terrible and I would never want to cast. So why is it that we're seeing all this talk about sorcerers getting boosted? Well, I think it's because of the levels we're about to cover, the high levels, the ultra high levels. And if that's the case, then saying sorcerers got massively boosted is actually really misleading, because levels that we actually play at, they haven't really been boosted. So I just wanted to correct the record here that sorcerers up to level 14 don't seem more powerful to me. I think they're going to be more fun to play because we're not always using the exact same tricks, and we're going to see some additional metamagics. We have a better quality of life as far as spell selection goes, so I am happy with the changes up to this point, but I do not think, at least up to level 14, that the sorcerers have really been boosted in power levels at all. Okay, we're up to 15th level, and we get Sorceress Restoration, which replenishes 4 expended sorcery points whenever you roll initiative or finish a short rest. So I love this. The old Sorceress Restoration was a Sorcerer Capstone, and it gave you 4 sorcery points whenever you completed a short rest. So they've moved that back here to 15th level instead of 18th like most classes did, and they buffed it also to provide sorcery points when you roll initiative. And Sorceress Restoration was always a feel-bad capstone, so I appreciate the buffing here, and I'm all for it. Then we get to level 18, and we're going to get the big one. In fact, I'm going to come back to this because it's a problem. At 20th level, we get an epic boon. Okay, that's nice. Let's talk about 18th level. So Arcane Apotheosis says, you are now so suffused with magic that you can alter reality itself. You always have the wish spell prepared. And if you undergo the spell's casting stress, you have no chance of losing the ability to cast the spell. In addition, you can cast Wish to replicate a spell of 1st through 8th level without expending a 9th level spell slot. You instead expend a slot of the replicated spell's level. Once you use Wish in this way, you can't do so again until you finish a long rest. And this is broken. So anytime you hear online that sorcerers got way more powerful in this playtest, it's likely they're talking about this. So if you're playing a 17th level or lower sorcerer, I mean, 9th level spells are really powerful, always have been, but they're no more powerful than they've always been. But you get to 18th level, and this is jaw-dropping. So why is this so broken? Well, we have to talk about what is generally considered the most powerful spell in the game, Wish. So the Wish spell generally has two uses. The first use is open-ended, so you can cast Wish and you can just make up what you want it to do. Now they give 5 examples of what it can do, and some examples are you allow up to 20 creatures you can see to regain all hit points, and you end all effects on them as described in the Greater Restoration spell. Or you grant up to 10 creatures that you can see resistance to a damage type you choose, presumably forever. But if you cast Wish in this way, there is a cost, and that cost is you become weakened. And that is for 2d4 days, though you can cut that in half if you just take it easy. The penalties are pretty steep during that time. You take a d10 necrotic damage every time you cast a spell for each level of the spell, and that can't be reduced, and your strength drops to 3. But the big downside of using Wish this way is there is a 1 in 3 chance that you lose Wish and you can never cast it again. That is a huge penalty. So most of the time Wish gets used, in my experience, they use it in the second way, and that's replicating a spell of 1 through 8th level. And that can be any spell in the game, doesn't need to be a sorcerer spell. And when that happens, I mean, you cast Wish as an action, and then the spell effect just happens. And it doesn't matter what the spell level is, it doesn't matter what the casting time is, it doesn't matter if it has a costly component, you can ignore all that stuff because you're casting Wish, not that spell. Now, you would think that would mean that Wish is incredibly versatile. However, it's not as versatile as a lot of people think, because you're never going to use Wish to cast Grease. So what you tend to look for are spells that have long casting times, and now you can do them as an action. Or they have really expensive components, and now you can do them without those components. One common one is Resurrection. So you can cast Resurrection as one action, no component, which is really, really good. But anyways, those are the 2 ways that Wish can be cast, and let's talk about why this feature is so broken. So if we cast Wish for that open-ended purpose, we still have the weakening, but we no longer have that 1 in 3 chance to lose the ability to cast Wish again. So this means Wish can be abused in downtime like never before. The obvious and spelled out thing is, given enough time, you could just give yourself and your entire group resistance to every kind of damage. But of course, it's open-ended, so there really is no established limit to downtime abuse for Wish. The chance of losing the Wish spell permanently was always the prevention of this kind of abuse. It was just too risky, and it just wasn't going to be indefinitely repeatable. You were going to eventually lose it. That's gone now. So that's one way it's broken. Then look at the other way. So now you can replicate a spell of 1st through 8th level with Wish, and you don't even have to use a 9th level spell slot. Instead, use a slot of the replicated spell's level. Now, presumably, all the stuff about casting time and costly components and meeting requirements, all being waived, is still in effect. Now, this can be done only once per long rest, but here's the thing. If casting Wish to replicate a spell effect was a decent use of a 9th level slot in 5th edition, and I think you would be hard-pressed to find anyone to say otherwise, then what they've done here is they've given sorcerers a second 9th level spell. Everyone else is limited to 1 per day, and frankly, that's plenty. 9th level spells are bonkers. So this feature has broken on top of broken. Is this salvageable? Yeah, actually I think it's pretty easily salvageable with some minor tweaks. First, you just need to get rid of the part about no chance of losing the ability to cast a spell. That 33% chance of losing Wish actually does some really heavy lifting. And speaking as someone who's played a lot of high-level D&D, it really does end up being the main discouragement from abuse. And the second thing they would need to do is restrict the second part of this feature to 1 to 5th level spells. One casting of a 1st through 5th level spell from any school or class with no costly components, no requirements to be met, is actually still really good. But it would contain this quite a bit. There's another way they could fix it too, and maybe that's their plan. And that is, they could redesign the Wish spell, because that could be coming. I mean, we've seen a number of new spells in this playtest, but they're new spells. In the previous playtest, we've had a small sample of some of the redesigned spells, and from the most part, from what I've seen, crappy spells like Barkskin get buffed, and powerful spells like Banishment got hard nerfs. It is entirely possible they've already redesigned Wish with a huge nerfing, who knows? But we can't assume that given what we have in this playtest. Arcane Apotheosis is broken as hell, making an 18th level sorcerer more broken than it has ever been. So to wrap this up, the playtest sorcerer is probably a smidge less powerful up to 14th level, but maybe a bit ahead at 15, and it breaks at 18. If the intention was to make sorcerers good at casting leveled spells with spell attacks, then mission failed. These spells do not deliver the necessary damage to compete with classes that can do far more damage without expending resources. Spells like Chaos Bolt really have no useful purpose unless they receive significant damage boosting, and they need to upcast much better than they currently do. Now, I like the idea of sorcerer-only spells, but other than Arcane Eruption, the ones we see here do not deliver. They need rebalancing, unless the intention is to do an across-the-board spell nerfing of existing spells. And that could be the case, we don't know yet, but if they are planning nerfs to this degree though, they've gone way too far. The rebalancing of Metamagic I thought was well done overall. It lowers the ceiling for sorcerers, but it raises the floor, and that means we're going to see a lot more variety in Metamagic use than we've seen in 5th edition. And for me, that's a good thing. I like the 3rd and 6th level features for Draconic Sorcery. The 10th level one is a little bit underwhelming, and the 14th level one is a huge disappointment. So that's the Sorcerer, and I'll be looking next at the Wizard. But until that time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks everybody, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you to Airhead, Alex R, Vo, Bloody 9, Artherazone, CJ, Chris C, Clement Brunette, Coral, Dank Train, Dewey Cheatham and Howe, Douglas Reynolds, Eden the DM, Eric Wasserman, FBKO5, Gishlife, Lightfoot, Heisenberger, Jay Gemmel, James Makla, James Sprague, Jean-Baptiste Blanchette, Jiriru, John Matera, Jonathan Zucker, Joseph Van Horn, Justin Times, Lars V, Mark D, Mark Sexton, Math Guy Dave, Mr. Brett, PCZ, Quicksilver HG80, Ramen Goblin, Scott Parsons, Sig, Tazel, Thunderlock, Vu, and William Whittles.